There are 17 dragons in House of the Dragon, so before Season 3, we're going to explain all of them, and we'll rank them all from the smallest to the biggest Skyzilla. But we're also going to explain how the dragons were actually created, all the lore and history of each dragon, their riders, who has the most battle experience, and everything you need to know about dragons before Season 3. So let's start with how the dragons were created. 5,000 years ago, the ancient Valyrians discovered the dragons inside the 14 volcanoes of the Valyrian Peninsula. Other legends claim that the dragons were brought to Valyria from the Shadowlands beyond Ashai. This is where ancient magic is very strong, and it's where Melisandre comes from.
A trader from Karth told me that dragons come from the moon. It is known. It is known.
Now, there are other far more evil origins for the dragon, but we'll talk about those later. The Valyrians tamed the dragons with blood magic, conquering most of Essos, the continent that's east of Westeros. They ruled for 5,000 years, but then, 234 years before the events of the show, the dragons and their lords were decimated during the Doom of Valyria. This is a cataclysmic event where all 14 volcanoes erupted at once, destroying the once mighty empire. But the Targaryens survived the Doom with a handful of their dragons. And later, Aegon conquered Westeros with his sisters and their massive dragons, and you know the rest.
We all dragons know that story.
So now let's start ranking the dragons, starting with the first one that we see in the show, Syrax. Syrax is Rhaenyra's yellow-scaled dragon. Rhaenyra claimed Syrax at the age of 7, and we know this from the book Fire and Blood. We're going to mention this book a lot since the show is based on it. Since Rhaenyra was the one to name Syrax after a Valyrian goddess, it means that she was her first rider. And this is an important bit of terminology. The Targaryens have this tradition of placing dragon eggs in their children's cribs. This forms a strong bond between the rider and their dragon when the egg hatches. But not all eggs hatch, so these riders need to find themselves older dragons. And those dragons usually have had previous riders. The show also reveals that just because you have Targaryen blood doesn't mean you can just walk up to a dragon and tame them. The dragon must accept its rider before the bond is formed. And if the dragon doesn't accept the rider... The dragons in the show are also divided by 3 types of breeds, and they are based on the skulls of a T-Rex, a horse, and a wolf. Syrax is that horse-like dragon which is bred for speed and travel. The T-Rex breed is more of a big fighter, and the wolf is a type of hybrid of a fighter and a hunter. These breeds might explain the size difference of the dragons. You see, dragons grow fast and they never stop growing. When they reach Skyzilla size, their bodies can no longer sustain themselves, and they literally start dying from their massive weight. But maybe some breeds don't grow as large, since Syrax is pretty small, even after the time jumps. But we know from the books and Game of Thrones that the Targaryens basically ruined the growth rate of their dragons. But how? Well, because they kept them in the dragon pit. They can't let the dragon just roam free all the time because, bad things can happen. This is why they put them in the dragon pit, but since the dragons are essentially kept in captivity, they can't grow naturally. On top of that, the dragons are being fed and stable, domesticated like horses.
A few generations later, the lost dragons were no larger than cats.
Let me out, person. Let me out of this tiny room. I need to grow into a big wolf.
Grow later, we're talking dragons, kid. There is also the Dragon Mount on Dragonstone, which is more of a natural habitat for dragons, and in theory, it doesn't hinder their growth as much. The shrinkage problem is also connected to the Doom of Valyria. This is because it was such a devastating event that magic started fading from the world. This could also explain why many eggs don't even hatch anymore. And magic is also the reason why Drogon got so massive so fast in Game of Thrones, because he was wild and free, and also because his birth is tied to magic and blood sacrifice. And we'll compare Drogon's size to all of these dragons later. So when you guys have your House of the Dragon watch parties, you can regale your friends with all of these dragon facts. But actually be careful, because during Season 8, I played a drinking game where we drank every time Jon Snow said, "I don't want it." And I got messed up.
Yeah, don't overdo it this year.
Well, I'm not worried about overdoing it anymore, even though, oh my God, I used to feel terrible the morning after drinking. Especially the older I get, I would feel sick and have headaches. It was like getting the flu just because I wanted to have a good time the night before. But now I feel perfectly normal the next day because I started using ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol, the sponsor of this video. You guys know, I have been talking about ZBiotics for years. I love this product. I hand these out before parties as little presents to my friends and family. So I'm excited to share all of these benefits with you. So here's how it works. This is the world's world's first genetically engineered probiotic, and it was invented by PhD scientists to tackle your rough mornings after drinking. You see, when you drink, alcohol actually gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. Now, it's a buildup of this byproduct and not dehydration that is to blame for the rough days after drinking. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and then you'll feel your best tomorrow. So now I know I can have a nice time tonight and I can still go to the gym tomorrow morning. So go to zbiotics.com/ScreenCrush to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use the code ScreenCrush at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so look, if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they're going to refund your money, no questions asked. You have to try out ZBiotics, you won't regret it, the link is below. Now, back to what I was saying. Now, I should clarify that the show doesn't actually provide any measurements of the dragons. According to different sources, Vhagar ranges between 150 meters to 90 meters, and 150 is probably a massive over-exaggeration because that's like 2 Boeing 747s or 5 whole blue whales.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
But internet math and calculations for these dragons is kind of impossible. Why? Well, because the size of the dragons in the show is very deceptive and inconsistent. I mean, there are scenes where Vhagar looks absolutely massive, but in some others, she magically shrinks. Game of Thrones had the same discrepancy with Drogon. Additionally, George R.R. Martin always keeps the size of the dragons pretty vague in the books.
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too. Yes.
So how are you going to rank them?
Great question. We'll be using information from the show, visual effects breakdowns, the books, and even the behind-the-scenes book that reveals the scale of the dragons, and that will allow us to compare the sizes. For example, check this VFX breakdown. You can see Syrax's scale compared to Rhaenyra. And now look at Vhagar's size with a very tiny Aemon.
So it's big.
So Syrax isn't really that big, but also not too small, and this is why she's going in the T-Rex tier.
But T-Rex is big.
I thought so too, but it turns out though that a T-Rex is only 12 to 13 meters long. Alright, so with all the heavy lore out of the way, ranking these lizards is going to be a lot easier. The next dragon is the coolest dragon in the show, and it's Caraxes, and he belongs to Daemon Targaryen. He is known as the Bloodworm due to his snake-like body and long noodle neck. He even got membranes on his legs and a roar that sounds like a dolphin.
Why is it so different?
Well, because he's deformed. He's a type of mutant. The myths claim that the Valyrians used blood magic and dark arts to create dragons, and they did this by twisting the flesh of humans and beasts like the wyverns and giant fire snakes. We see these human experiments in the tapestries in the opening credits.
Would you like to see the tapestry?
So maybe Caraxes is a result of that mutation from those fire snakes, or maybe Vhagar just stepped on his egg. It's believed that Caraxes was born around 72 after Aegon's conquest, or AC, which makes him about 60 years old. In Fire and Blood, Caraxes is not the biggest, but he is the fiercest of all the dragons, and he's ready to fight the entire world. His first rider was Aemon Targaryen, and get this, he was the father of Rhaenys, and Caraxes got a lot of battle experience. When Aemon was his rider, Caraxes teamed up with Vermithor and Vhagar during a war with Dorne. And Dorne is the one kingdom that resisted the Targaryens for nearly 200 years. Aemon also flew Caraxes against the Triarchy pirates, and during that battle, Aemon was killed by a lucky arrow shot. His death was avenged by his younger brother who rode Vhagar at the time. And actually, Aemon's death set the events of the show into motion.
How?
Well, Aemon was the heir to the throne, so technically this made his daughter, Rhaenys, his successor, but Aemon's younger brother, Balon, was chosen over her. And years later, Rhaenys was passed over again in favor of Balon's son, Viserys, and look, you know the rest. 13 years after Aemon's death, Daemon claimed Caraxes, and then Daemon unleashed the Bloodworm on the Triarchy in the Stepstones War. So Caraxes might be smaller than, like, let's say Vhagar, but as an old master once said,
Size matters not.
because Daemon is the most experienced dragon rider in combat, and combat experience on Dragonback is very important. At times, it's more crucial than the size of the dragons.
So how big is the red snake?
Well, in Fire and Blood, Caraxes is said to be half the size of Vhagar, and there's a good illustration in the behind-the-scenes book that shows Caraxes' scale relative to Vhagar. And if we put Caraxes right next to Vhagar, I guess he's sort of half her size. Again, the show is very deceptive with the sizes. So Caraxes is way bigger than Syrax in this chart, and he goes in the B-52 tier. The next dragon is Sea Smoke, and he looks a hell of a lot like Drogon.
Dad!
Seasmoke's current rider is Adam of Hull, but before that he belonged to Laenor Valerion and he was his first rider. And if I'm not mistaken, this makes Laenor the first Valerion to claim a dragon, because the Valerions were never dragon riders in Old Valyria. Also, Seasmoke has battle experience from that war in the Stepstones. But as you know, Laenor sailed away with his lover, choosing a dude in a boat over a freaking dragon.
He chose poorly.
So after Laenor left, Seasmoke was riderless for 6 years until they tried to saddle him up with this guy, and Seasmoke said, hell no, I'm doing the choosing myself. So Seasmoke claims Adam as his new rider.
But how can he claim him?
Well, Adam is the illegitimate son of Corlys Velaryon, and the Targaryens and the Velaryons were crossbreeding for generations. In fact, Aegon's mother was a Velaryon. So when Seasmoke sees Adam, he senses someone who is like his previous rider, similar to how Drogon knew that Jon Snow was secretly a Targaryen.
Yeah, okay, I got that part, but if Laenor is alive, how can Seasmoke get a new rider?
Okay, that's actually a very good question. Unlike in the show, in Fire and Blood, Laenor doesn't fake his death and he actually gets killed. But remember, the riders don't really control their dragons from the saddle, it's more of a magical connection. They can sense what their riders are feeling and maybe even thinking. They are bound by blood and a form of telepathy.
Dragons are intelligent. More intelligent than men, according to some maesters.
Drogon always knew where to find Daenerys and came to her when she needed him. So maybe Seasmoke sensed that Laenor wanted to escape his shitty life and he had no choice but to leave the dragon behind, and Seasmoke understood that on some level. We also see this when Laena begs Vhagar to burn her and the dragon actually hesitates and doesn't want to kill her rider.
Okay, but how big is he?
So this might be a surprise. There is this scene from season 1 where Seasmoke is next to Sunfire and they're evenly sized. And according to this size chart from the Season 1 concept art, Seasmoke is smaller than Syrax. But then in Season 2, we have this very clear shot of his scale next to Syrax. You can see that Seasmoke and Syrax are basically the same size. So Seasmoke goes into the T-Rex tier, but above Syrax since he's got battle experience. And by the way, guys, if you love dragons, then you are going to love this brand new Dance of the Dragons t-shirt we have at our merch store. This is designed to look like a tour shirt, Seven Kingdoms tour, with all the battles listed on the back. I love this shirt. And we also are proud to debut this brand new Winter Wolves shirt. The Winter Wolves are a badass group who are going to be very important in this season of House of the Dragon. We also have our brand new Dunkin' Egg shirt. And of course we have classics like Cersei's Wine Mixer, Team Green and Team Black shirts, Sir Pounce on the Iron Throne, and Hammer and Fury, named after one of my favorite characters from the book, Hugh Hammer. And if you become a store member, just at our $5 tier, you get an additional 15% off store-wide. Links are below. The fourth dragon on our list is Meleys. She's dead, but we have to talk about the Red Queen of the Queen that never was. Meleys and Caraxes are almost like siblings. They're both red, and they were both born around 72 AC, which makes them both 60 years old. And they share a connection through their riders. Before Rhaenys, Meleys' rider was Alyssa Targaryen, and she was Daemon's mom, who we see in this creepy vision. And like we've said, Rhaenys' father used to ride Caraxes, so their children switched dragons. In fact, as a boy, Daemon tried to claim Meleys, but she threw him off and chose Rhaenys instead.
Well, at least somebody chose her over a dude.
That's cold, but true. And back then, Caraxes, Meleys, and Vhagar were friendly with each other since their riders were brothers and sisters. This is because the dragons are influenced directly by their riders' personalities and intentions, almost like a telepathic connection.
You can read minds.
Alyssa died in 84 AC due to a childbirth complication, and Rhaenys claimed Meleys not long after. In Fire and Blood, Meleys is described as one of the fastest dragons, but no amount of speed could save her from Vhagar's out-of-nowhere finishing move.
Surprise, mother...
And her fight with Vhagar was actually her first ever battle.
So who's bigger, Meleys or Caraxes?
Well, you would think that Caraxes is bigger, but time to reveal one of the blurred images here. You can see that Meleys is slightly bigger than the old noodle neck, but if we put them on top of each other, the size difference is minimal. So she goes in the B-52 tier, but I think Caraxes still gets the edge since he's one of the most important dragons in the show and he's a war veteran. And speaking of Meleys, she gives us a good indication of the size of our next dragon, and it's the Golden Sunfire, the majestic creature who deserved a far more worthy rider than Aegon. Aegon was Sunfire's first and only rider, so he's pretty young and not that big. Right now he might be dead, but maybe not. And as we see here, he looks to be about the same size as Seasmoke. And as we establish, Seasmoke and Syrax are about the same size, so we can also determine Sunfire's size as well. We have this profile shot of Sunfire and Aegon right here. So let's cut Aegon and align him with Rhaenyra in this shot next to Syrax. And now add Sunfire, align them, zoom and enhance, and there you have it, Sunfire size compared to Syrax. They're basically about the same size. So Sunfire also goes in the T-Rex tier.
Person, when are we going to talk about the really big dragons, you know, the fun ones?
Well, we're about to, but first let's finish up with the little guys. The next dragon is Virmax, Jace's brownish-green dragon. Now, Virmax's egg was placed in Jacaerys' crib, so he's a very young dragon. So far, we've only seen a few brief glimpses of Virmax, but the trailer for Season 3 gives a good indication of his scale. And he's about the same size as Moondancer. She is Bela's green dragon with tiger stripes, and Bela is her first rider. And this VFX breakdown shows Moondancer's size compared to Bela, and this gives you a good indication of the scale of most of these smaller dragons. I believe Moondancer is the horse-like breed, same as Syrax, while Virmax is the wolf-like breed, and he seems to be bigger and denser. So Virmax and Moondancer go in the Dino Bike tier, but Virmax is bigger. Luke's dragon Arax, who was killed by Vhagar, also goes in this tier, but he is much smaller, and he's also dead. Now, since we brought up Grandma Zilla herself, it's time to talk about her, but it will make more sense to first explain Balerion because their histories are intertwined. Balerion only appears as a gigantic skull, but he is the biggest and oldest Targaryen dragon. But there might be a secret dragon who is bigger. We'll talk about him later. Balerion helped to create the Targaryen dynasty, and his flame forged the spiky chair that everybody fights over. He is called the Black Dread because of his black scales. They actually say that Drogon is his reincarnation, so that's why we're using Drogon footage here. In the books, it's estimated that he hatched 114 years before Aegon's conquest, and before the Doom. Although there is no official record of his birth, so he might be older. The Targaryens arrived in Westeros with 5 adult dragons, but Balerion outlived them all, making him more than 208 years old.
Balerion was the last living creature to have seen old Valyria before the Doom.
Long before Aegon, Balerion's first rider was Daenerys Targaryen, and she is the Targaryen who had a vision about the doom of Valyria, which is the reason why the Targaryens came to Westeros. And the story goes that she had this dream right after claiming Balerion. So this connects to Aegon's dream to conquer Westeros 100 years later.
I'm no ordinary woman. My dreams come true.
Aegon conquered the 7 kingdoms with Balerion alongside his sister wives and their dragons. Visenya rode Vhagar and Rhaenys had Meraxes. Even before the conquest, Aegon and Balerion fought across the Narrow Sea against pirates from Volantis. But the conquest changed everything. Aegon unleashed the Black Dread on Harrenhal, turning the biggest castle in Westeros into a ruin. And then, the 3 massive dragons burned thousands of men during the Field of Fire battle. These were the pivotal 2 moments that showed the 7 kingdoms that a war against dragons is futile unless you also have dragons.
Aegon Targaryen changed the rules. That's why every child alive still knows his name, 300 years after his death.
Years after Aegon's death, Balerion was claimed by Maegor, who is Aegon's second son. He was a pretty bad dude, and that's why they called him Maegor the Cruel. There was a religious uprising and a rebellion, so Maegor and Balerion burned them all. Maegor also usurped the throne, which started the first Targaryen civil war. And Balerion was the first dragon to kill another dragon and rider in Westeros when he fought Maegor's nephew and his dragon, Quicksilver. It was also Balerion's final battle, because after Maegor died under mysterious circumstances, Balerion was claimed by Princess Arya. And this was a terrible tragedy. Balerion flew away with the young princess, disappearing for more than a year. And when they returned, Arya had fireworms crawling under her skin, and she literally burned from the inside. Balerion had a massive cut on his body, and he was never the same afterwards.
What happened to them?
Well, it's believed that they flew to Old Valyria. And remember, after the Doom, Valyria was sort of like an eldritch Chernobyl. And who knows what kind of monster could actually hurt Balerion.
It's Godzilla! It looks like Godzilla, but due to international copyright laws, it's not.
In the 40 years after this incident, Balerion was riderless, and he was mostly confined to the Dragon Pit. His last rider was actually Viserys. Yep, that Viserys. But by that point, Balerion had deteriorated completely, and he died shortly after. Fitting, since all Viserys wanted to do was play with his Legos, which is actually really tragic. Balerion was like this old war hero whose fire forged the 7 kingdoms, but in the end, he just faded away.
So how big was Balerion?
Okay, so in the books, it's said that his shadow engulfed entire towns. Sometimes he can swallow a mammoth whole, sometimes it's like aurochs, which is basically like a really big bovine. But Vhagar is said to be nearly the size of Balerion, so let's talk about Vhagar and then see who's bigger. Vhagar is obviously Grandma Zilla. Her first rider was Visenya, Aegon's older sister and wife. Visenya was a badass warrior, so old girl knew war for most of her life. Vhagar and Meraxes hatched from the eggs that the Targaryens brought over from Old Valyria. So Vhagar was born 52 years before the conquest, so now she's 184 years old. But Meraxes actually hatched first. But during the war in Dorne, a lucky scorpion bolt hit Meraxes right in the eye, killing the dragon and her rider, Rhaenys. proving that maybe it didn't really matter that Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet.
Oh!
We see Meraxes' skull on Dragonstone.
So is she bigger than Vhagar?
Well, Meraxes was older and bigger, but Vhagar outlived her by more than 100 years, so she must be bigger by now.
Some would say too large for our world.
But no one has more battle experience than Vhagar. She helped conquer the Seven Kingdoms, she burned armies, fleets, rebels, and pirates in countless battles. After Visenya died from old age, Vhagar was riderless for nearly 30 years until she was claimed by Balon the Brave, that is the father of Viserys, Daemon, and also apparently Ulf the White. He also rode her into a few battles, but Balon died during a hunting accident, and many years later, Vhagar was claimed by Laena Velaryon. This was her first peaceful rider, and Grandma Zilla could finally take a nap. But then, Aemond ruined everything.
Please go away, let me sleep for the love of God!
So Vhagar isn't just a flying war machine, but she also has the biggest dragon kill count. She has killed 2 dragons so far, well 3 if Sunfire is really dead.
So how big is she?
Okay, so Vhagar is 184, about 24 years younger than Balerion when he died. In the books, it's said that Vhagar is nearly the size of the Black Dread. But it's been nearly 40 years since Balerion died, and Vhagar is still kicking. And she is so enormous that she can't fit in the dragon pit anymore. Balerion spent his last decades in the pit. And so, make of that what you will. But Balerion was born in Valyria before the Doom, and this is important.
Because of magic?
Exactly. Back then, magic was still very strong in that part of the world. And remember, Drogon grew so massive because his birth was tied to magic and blood sacrifice. Even Dany's other 2 dragons grew very fast. Magic for dragons is like nukes for Godzilla. So it's likely that Balerion was already gigantic before Vhagar even hatched, and dragons never stopped growing. Additionally, the behind-the-scenes book reveals that the prop of Valerion's skull is 12 meters high and 5 meters across. And actually, here's me next to that skull. So they're both Skyzilla tier, but I believe that Vhagar is still under Balerion, mostly because I think that HBO wants to keep Balerion as the biggest dragon, especially for that Aegon movie they're making. But speaking of massively oversized dragons, time to reveal this blurred dragon, and yes, it's Drogon. Apparently, he is that massive, bigger than Caraxes. Doesn't look like it sometimes, but it's canon, which is insane since he was just 7 years old.
You're a big boy.
But Drogon isn't quite Skyzilla tier, so he's the first dragon in the Jumbo Jet tier. So we're winding down to our last 7 dragons, and the next dragon is the biggest mystery of the show, and that's Dreamfire. She is Helena's dragon, and in 2 seasons we barely saw her. In Fire and Blood, Dreamfire has pale blue scales and a slender body. Her first rider was Rhaena Targaryen, Aegon's first granddaughter, but she didn't participate in any battles. 47 years after Rhaena's death, Dreamfire was claimed by Helaena. But Helaena doesn't really ride in the show, so Dreamfire is mostly kept in the Dragon Pit, saving HBO a lot of CGI money. Dreamfire hatched in 32 AC while Aegon the Conqueror was still alive. So she's about 100 years old, which means that other than Vhagar, she is the oldest dragon.
Really? But what about that other big dragon? Isn't he older?
Nope, Vermithor is younger, but we'll talk about him a bit later. The first time we see her, Dreamfire doesn't look that huge. When she flies with the other green dragons, she doesn't seem to be much bigger than Sunfire, but I guess faraway objects also look smaller.
These are small, but the ones out there are far away.
So I think that the creators of the show didn't actually decide what she looks like or her size, because there's nothing about her in the VFX breakdowns or the behind-the-scenes book. In fact, they might have just used Drogon's CGI model, and in the book, Fire and Blood, it's implied that Dreamfire is the mother of Daenerys' dragons. But this was apparently retconned in the show, since in Season 1, Syrax lays 3 eggs, and in Season 2, Rhaenyra sends 4 eggs to Pentos. And director Geeta Vasant Patel confirmed that these are Dany's dragons. So I guess the big mystery now is what happened to the blue egg.
So how big is she then?
Well, Season 2 gives us a better clue to her size when Rhaenyra and Corlys talk about her.
And her dragon.
Dreamfire. Hatched when the Conqueror was king. She is formidable.
And it will be kind of poetic if the Greens have this massive dragon that they can't use because Helaena refuses to fight. So even if she's not Drogon's mom, she might at least be in the Jumbo Jet tier, but below Drogon. Another dragon we've barely seen is Taraxis. He belongs to Rhaenyra's youngest strong boy, Joffrey. We get a very brief glimpse of Taraxis in this cage. So he's still pretty small, about the size of Dany's dragons in Season 3 when this badass moment happened.
Dracarys.
So Taraxis is Velociraptor tier. Rhaenyra has 2 more boys, Aegon and Viserys. The egg of little Viserys hasn't hatched yet, but Aegon has Stormcloud. So yeah, Stormcloud goes in the Velociraptor tier, although he's much smaller, but I'm not going to add another tier. We've got enough already. We've got 5 more dragons to talk about, so let's finally talk about the 2 new big ones. The first is Vermithor. He is very big, but how does he compare to Vhagar? Vermithor's rider used to be the old King Jaehaerys himself. His egg was placed in baby Jaehaerys' crib, which means that Vermithor is about 98 years old. And what's so impressive about him is that, despite Vermithor being younger than Dreamfire, he's bigger than her, and he grew really fast. Vermithor has battle experience fighting in 2 Dornish wars, and Jaehaerys was Vermithor's only rider for 50 years. After the Old King's death, Vermithor was without a rider for 30 years until he was claimed by Hugh Thorgarian after he survived Rhaenyra's roasty Hunger Games. And this is poetic since Hugh is Jaehaerys' grandson. But also, Hugh's mother was Sarah Targaryen, the Old King's rebellious daughter. After a scandal in her youth, Jaehaerys forced Sarah to become a silent sister, but she ran away and started working in pleasure houses just to get back at her dad. And this is how Hugh was born.
So how big is he?
Well, Vermithor's head towers over Rhaenyra. Compare that to how tiny Seasmoke is here, or even Meleys. It's not even close. In Fire and Blood, Vermithor is nearly the same size as Vhagar. Vermithor even has that loose double chin nutsack like Vhagar, which I guess is a true testament of a giant dragon. So he goes in the Skyzilla tier, but under Meraxes because I think those OG dragons are still bigger. But Vermithor is inherently connected to Silverwing. You see, Jaehaerys was happily married to his sister Alysanne, and Alysanne was Silverwing's rider. The love that Jaehaerys and Alysanne shared carried over to their dragons, because they used to coil together, which is basically like dragon spooning.
Did you pull a knife on me in the night?
Silverwing has no prior battle experience, and she is a friendly dragon. That is why she did not roast Ulf. Cregan Stark said that Jaehaerys and Alysanne came to see the wall, but their dragons refused to fly beyond, probably because they didn't want to be target practice for the Winter Olympics javelin champion. After Alysanne's death, Silverwing was riderless for about 40 years, and then Ulf stumbles into Silverwing's lair and learns how to train your dragon.
So how big is she?
Well, Silverwing was born around 36 to 42 AC, which makes her about 90 years old, so she's obviously big. So it might be her slim build that makes her look smaller because her head is massive compared to Ulf's body. But we can use the VFX model scale to see her size. So she's very big, but smaller than Vermithor. So I still think that Silverwing is in the Jumbo Jet tier, but bigger than Drogon, but I might be wrong, let me know. Okay, time to explain the 2 new dragons in the show, and after them there's one secret bonus dragon. The 3rd season will finally introduce Alicent's son, Daeron Targaryen, and his dragon is Tessarion. She earned the name the Blue Queen for her blue scales, and she can shoot blue flames, which proves that you don't need to be a zombie dragon to have blue fire. I really hope they keep it for the show because, as Avatar The Last Airbender taught us, blue flames are the coolest.
We will dominate the earth!
Tessarion hatched around the same time as Vermax, so they're about the same size. So Tessarion goes in the Dino Bike tier, but below Virmax and Moondancer because she's just recently started flying. And the final new dragon is Sheepstealer. At the end of the 1st season, Daemon mentioned that there are 3 wild dragons.
Then there are the 3 wild dragons, all of whom nest here.
So what's a wild dragon? Do they like party a lot?
No, these are dragons that were never claimed by any riders. They're basically the unwanted, homeless dragons. Sheepstealer has mud-brown scales and a kind of deformed body, so maybe he's a bit of a mutant too. Rhaena finds him hunting sheep in the Vale, hence the name. It's not the natural hunting ground of dragons. George R. R. Martin will tell you all about that. I should also say that Sheepstealer has a very different rider in the books, but they changed it to Rhaena in the show. In the book, Sheepstealer hatched when King Jaehaerys was young, so it makes him a pretty old dragon.
So is he like really big?
Well, we get a clear shot of his scale right here with Rhaena standing on this hill. So let's estimate his size by putting him next to Syrax in this shot again. Let's extrapolate Rhaena and align her with Rhaenyra from this scene, and then do the same to Sheepstealer and compare him to Syrax. And there you have it. Sheepstealer is slightly bigger than Syrax, but not by much, which is surprising because he should be way bigger. But it looks like they scaled Sheepstealer up for Season 3. I think the show is keeping him smaller than Caraxes on purpose so as not to overshadow one of the main dragons in the show. So for now, Sheepstealer goes in the T-Rex tier, but is way bigger than Seasmoke. So that's all the dragons we see in the show, but we got that bonus dragon, and this one might be older and bigger than Balerion.
Say what? It's impossible.
Other than Sheepstealer, there are 2 more wild dragons. There's Grey Ghost, who's really shy, and that's about it. But there's another, the biggest and oldest wild dragon, and he is simply known as the Cannibal. He eats dead dragons, smaller dragons, and dragon eggs. And and I guess eating dragons should be making him bigger. And according to the legends, the cannibal was on Dragonstone even before the Targaryens arrived there, so in theory, he's older than Balerion.
So he's like Super Skyzilla.
Well, yeah, if he's actually that old.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, here's the thing about the cannibal. The only time he's mentioned is in Fire and Blood, and the exact quote about him goes like this. The cannibal had made his lair on Dragonstone even before the coming of the Targaryens, some small folk claimed. See, some small folk claimed. The small folk is the key word. We mentioned Fire and Blood a few times, but here's the thing about this book. It is written like a history book, told from the perspective of in-universe historians who kind of give their side of the story, and they are all unreliable narrators.
You're fine, he's a terrible maester.
And all of them agree that the stories about the cannibal living on Dragonstone before the Targaryens are just bullshit. Now, there are legends about dragons living in Westeros back in ancient times, and maybe the cannibal is a descendant of those dragons. But the only proof that the cannibal is older than Balerion is the word of the small folk. And are we really going to take the tales of peasants as, well, he probably did exist, but the stories about him were grossly exaggerated. I mean, if there was a dragon bigger than Balerion and Vhagar in Westeros, wouldn't it be a bigger deal? And if the cannibal was so massive, why wouldn't the Targaryens try to claim him? But more importantly, why would the Targaryens allow a wild dragon to eat their most precious resource? My theory is that the cannibal is like this natural janitor on Dragonstone. He eats the leftovers and any dragons who are too weak or just dead dragons.
Ew, you feed your dragons dragons?
Unless, of course, he was so massive and old that even Balerion didn't want to mess with him. But what do you guys think? Is the cannibal bigger than Balerion, and did he even exist? So this was our ranking of the dragons in the show from the smallest to the biggest, but it's also a list of the most dangerous dragons. Do you agree, and how would you rank these dragons? Remember to head to zbiotics.com/ScreenCrush and use the code ScreenCrush at checkout for 15% off. Big shout out to Pavel T, who wrote and edited this video, and let us know what you guys think down in the comments or on our free to join Discord server, or subscribe to me on Substack. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.